Hello and welcome to Europa Universalis 4. I am Lord Forwind, here with a guide on how to play Aragon, the relatively forgotten great power in Europe. I think it has got one of the lower play rates of large nations in Europe, which it definitely counts as, with a total of 240 development, 90 or 45 from Naples and 195 of their own development. So Aragon is a relatively unique country. It's located in the Iberian Peninsula, obviously with Castile, Portugal, Granada, and Navarra, but is a little bit more focused into Europe than the rest of the Iberian major two nations, Portugal and Castile. Granada doesn't really count, and Navarra pretty much gets wiped out within a year or two. Even though, in fact, one of the goals which you can do as Aragon is try and conquer them or something. But Aragon, in general, let's see. Quick rundown of Aragonese ideas. 10% trade efficiency, 20 Gaeli combat ability, negative 15% mercenary maintenance, 25 national sailors modifier, 10% naval force limit, 20% trade steering, negative 10% stability cost, plus 20% global trade power, monthly autonomy change, and morale of armies 10%, with a finisher of negative 10% culturally conversion cost. One of the worst finishers I have ever seen in Europa. So if you look at it, you'll notice that Aragon is very much focused towards trade, specifically internal Mediterranean trade, and combat, specifically naval combat, with a nice little side of land combat with that morale and that mercenary maintenance. So Aragon is located, it's kind of tough to tell you where exactly located. It starts out pretty much in Iberia, but it also has pretty much most of the major Mediterranean islands, with the exception, obviously, of Corsica, but they also have a personal union over Naples, which is relatively stable, and at some point, 1492 can, in fact, be integrated, which is worth doing when the time comes. You also start out with a pretty much inevitable rivalry in Castile. I don't think I've managed to play a game where they didn't hate you, which is historically accurate. They had lots of bad blood between them. On the other hand, you have a relative friend in Portugal, and sometimes you can have a friend up here in France. In terms of alliances, it's worth getting a royal marriage with France and then hopefully sneaking an alliance with them, because that will provide a buffer against any expansion that Castile might do against you. Now, there are two approaches to deal with Castile, and the reason I'm talking about Castile is they're the biggest threat to Aragon outside of maybe if France decides to go after you. Castile and Aragon hate each other, and obviously they're both located on the Iberian Peninsula, but it is important to note that Castile is in fact stronger than Aragon, pretty much due to their traditions, plus 15% morale, and a fact that I believe, if I look it up correctly, that they in fact have a larger army. Yes, they have 21,000. True, you do have the 9,000 from Naples, but trusting the AI to show up to defend you in a war is pretty stupid. Other moves to make are ally yourself to Portugal, which is always a solid move, because Portugal usually will be friends with Castile, but it's also a fairly reliable ally in terms of defending you, and in the event of a war with Castile, they will draw off a good portion of the Castilian army to go take them out. They'll lose, don't get me wrong, they will lose, but you can use that time to advance any wars. You've got the choice of conquering Castile, which is your obvious first route of expansion, because most of Italy, specifically northern Italy, is boxed off from you by the HRE. The only other target is really Provence, which is currently allied to France. You can't reach Brittany, and other than that, your only other options are to expand in North Africa, which is in fact very viable, but early on, and in fact later on, you don't really have any conversion strength benefits. The most you will get is obviously the active uniformity, advancement of religion, and just any other event that might pop up there. You will have to hire a Inquisitor advisor to convert North Africa if you go that way, and will slow down your expansion to the very necessary Aragon idea trees by having to go religious just to control the region, but it is very viable to conquer North Africa. So Castile is the obvious target. Now, you can conquer them, as I've described, alliance with Portugal, alliance with France, calling France into a war, such stuff. You can also try and kill Navarra, but I don't never find it very worth it. They're only 7 developments, and they'll be swallowed up by either France, England, or Castile very early on. You can select a naval doctrine for the game, and I would recommend that you take the galley combat ability one. Sounds a bit crazy, but when you take that, that will give you 15% galley combat ability from your naval tradition, plus the 20% from your just Aragonese tradition. You'll have 35% galley combat ability, which on its own probably will make you the dominant power in the Mediterranean, barring, of course, multiple nations ganging up on you or England showing up with their fleet. The other big option to deal with Castile is don't fight them at all. Don't fight them at all. Just before, I think it's 1520 or so, you just need to have either a female on your throne or regency, or have Castile have a female ruler as well. It has to happen before 1530, and you will get the Iberian Wedding event. Now, normally the Iberian Wedding event gives Castile a personal union over both Aragon and Naples, but Aragon's version of the event gives you a personal union over Castile, assuming they're controlled by an AI and you're not playing multiplayer, because this guy doesn't really work that well in multiplayer. It's doable, but not really well, because human players obviously play differently than the AIs. When that happens, you'll get a union over Castile. The big problem at that point is that your Liberty Desire of Naples will spike over 50, and Castile's will be up there as well, because militarily wise, they're a lot stronger than you are. So that, in my opinion, is the safest option, is to wait and get a personal union over Castile, then just have a really strong military, and also try and expand either into Provence. Ideally, you'd want to get the Provence-Rhône estuary, or expand, take out Genoa and Corsica and stuff. You can also expand into Italy, but that's not doable until 1490, when everybody leaves the HRE. The important thing is to have a larger military, larger navy, and more land than Castile and Naples. Obviously, you can annex Naples once you hit 1492, but until you do that, if you get the Iberian Union, you're in a little bit of trouble. There are ways around that, relations and other stuff, but I'm not really going to go into it, other than to say that if you really desperately need to, enable support loyalists might be the single best subject interaction in the game in terms of keeping people happy. So in terms of expansion, we've already mentioned obviously Castile or North Africa, but Aragon has quite a bit of control of the Genoa trade node. In some ways, it should almost be called the Aragonese trade node, considering they start off with 25% of it just from like 2-3 provinces. You have an estuary, and you have a center of trade here in Valencia, which, important to note, Valencia is also your capital, bordered right against Castile, which is relatively dangerous. But it's probably worth it as playing as Aragon to try and snag some of the other centers of trade. Obviously, Naples has one, so you'll get that when you integrate them. Florence has another. Genoa has the third, along with France containing the most northern one. Your odds are you're not going to get the French one, but since France doesn't actually have their center of trade in this node, they're not a huge impact. The easiest one to get is Provence's. That has to wait till France either will not join a call to arms by Provence, or Provence loses their alliance with France. And then you can usually sneak in and steal that, which will give you an immense control of the region. Once the HRE collapse, taking Genoa's center of trade is not relatively hard unless France or Austria are allied to them, and Florence, matter of luck seeing who their allies are. But if you manage to control all of those, the amount of money you make from trade is considerably large. As it is, you almost make 7 gold, or you make 13 in this case from trade, which is relatively absurd if you want to look at it that way. Yeah. But obviously that's probably not accurate. It's just the starting value. But controlling the Mediterranean is definitely your region. You can, of course, go colonial, but that involves a considerable delay in getting there, because you actually have 2 more sea regions to cross than both Castile and Portugal do. 1, 2. Which means you definitely are going to be probably the last colonizer to reach there, unless Holland, France, or Scotland are actually colonized or are delayed in colonizing. If that case you do that, obviously exploration into expansion. It's also worth to note that you have no colonial ideas whatsoever. So if you're going to colonize, probably worth waiting till you might have a chance of forming the Spanish nation diplomatically. Now it's important to note that as Aragon you have no, of course you have no colonial ideas, so it might be worth switching to Spain and taking the Spanish national ideas so that you can actually form Spain. You have to wait till you get Admin Tech 10 and have more cities than them, and Casteel can't be too large either, the normal things. Or you can conquer them, form it militarily, but it's relatively difficult to conquer Casteel, plus you'll get coalitions if you expand that much because they're Catholic. Spain in North Africa is easier, but you're going to have to go religious ideas if you want to do that. If you want to dominate the Mediterranean, the first idea group I recommend you take, as usual, is defensive for the morale, which will barely put you on par with Casteel and a couple of the other nations in the area. You'll be behind Casteel when they get the Reconquista complete by finishing off Granada, which of course you can try and do first, but you have a considerably longer treaty with Granada than does Casteel, plus you don't have any actual claims on that region. In terms of actual missions, you have vassalize Navarra. So this does give you the incentive to take out Navarra, because it does give you permanent claims in the Castilian regions, but usually Navarra allies France or Casteel and then gets vassalized with them. If you work quickly, you can do it, but as I showed earlier on, you don't have a hope at vassalizing them, which means you're going to have to conquer them militarily, which has its own issues. Plus, you have to get a claim on them first. I don't believe you start with one. No, you don't. So after that, your only other one currently is Crowns of Iberia, which is pretty much control most of Castile, and then it gets you a claim on Andalusia down here. But if you do switch into Spain, you'll get the Spanish mission tree. You also have another small little mission tree to integrate Naples, which you want to do anyway, but that will give you some development in Naples' capital, and it will also give you a claim on Greece. If you conquer Greece and stuff, you get a mission to conquer Athens, which will give you a trade bonus. There are two achievements. Well, there's usually one achievement specifically for Aragon. There's another one which tends to be the achievement one gets when one plays Aragon. Of course, you can also go for Spain is Emperor if you form Spain. But the big one is Consulate of the Sea, as Aragon control all Mediterranean centers of trade. Well, I already mentioned how to snag several of them. The other ones are going to be, in the end, owned by Ragusa and the Ottomans, and obviously they start out being owned by the Mamelukes, but that will eventually become the Ottomans. And also you have to snag Tunis's centers of trade as well. So that's the achievement specific to Aragon. Of course, the tendency when you play Aragon is to go and form the Roman Empire, because you will already control a good amount of the regions just from forming Spain and integrating Naples, and also if you get the centers of trade. There is a strategy as Aragon, which is very difficult. I will just stick this out there. I've done it before. I got it recommended to me. Involves killing the Ottomans early on. Yeah, killing the Ottomans. Pretty crazy. The strategy is you start out with the most powerful navy in the Mediterranean, specifically also combined with Naples. If you manage to blockade the Strait of Momarta, or the Sea of Momarta here, and you trap the Ottoman army either in Europe or in the Middle East, you can easily overrun the other side, peace out, stealing their crossing provinces, and then removing the Ottomans as a threat for pretty much the rest of the game. So there's a couple ways of doing that. One, you declare a non-claim war on the Byzantines, take Constantinople. That means you have your army and your fleet right there. And then you hope that the Ottomans go after like Kandar, Karaman, or the AQ over here. Then you blockade the strait, hopefully quickly overrun their fort in Edirne. Or the other strategy is if they're going after the remaining Byzantines or Serbia, Albania, it's actually easier this way. You blockade the strait here. You leave your fort in Constantinople if you've taken it, and you siege down this fort, and you just occupy this province, with your fleet. They can't actually cross back over. You siege all this down, you steal the area, and then from then on you've got a power base in the Ottomans' land, and they're considerably weaker. Once you kill the Ottomans, it's very easy as Aragon to overrun this area, and thus you can easily conquer most of the Middle East as Aragon. It's actually one of the few strategies that really only Aragon and maybe like Kandar and a couple other miners can actually pull off, because you have to have a fairly strong navy and you have to pretty much be desperate to do so. So anyway, jumping back to legitimate things to do as Aragon. So in terms of ideas, defensive will allow you to fight Casteel and the Ottomans if you're fighting them. If you want to go more trade-oriented, trade ideas are actually really good as them, considering a lot of your income comes from trade already, and you've got one of the ending trade nodes of the game pretty much under your control from the start. It will just make it even stronger. You can make a lot of money just from this one trade node, but as I said earlier, you're going to want to conquer other centers of trade. If you want to go colonial, you have to wait, get expansion and exploration ideas, and get a lot more colonizational range. Outside of that, though, if you're going to conquer a lot, admin ideas as usual for that cheaper core cost and the 10% admin tech cost. In terms of military ideas, you actually might have a viable reason to take naval ideas combined with your naval doctrine, combined with your Aragonese traditions, combined with naval ideas. You're going to be looking at like 70 or so % galley combat ability, which means your galleys will pretty much fight on par with any heavy ships, so long as you're in the Mediterranean, but you're not really going outside of the Mediterranean if you go conquer the Mediterranean route. Obviously, if you've got a strong navy, that puts you in the incentivizes you to conquer all the little island provinces because they're easier to defend, which is something, if you kill the Ottomans early on, you can do fairly well. After that, it's really up to where you guys want to go. Maritime ideas is probably not worth it, even though it does allow you for a larger fleet and cheaper ships and everything, just because that's more of a ocean idea group, and it's not really that great anyway. Naval ideas, though, are pretty much only viable on Aragon or maybe England or any other nations who want to control interior seas. Later on, offensive ideas can also be very good, as can aristocratic ideas for the cheaper tech cost, coring, and the general stuff. Aristocratic's not the best on them, but there's not a lot of really great needed ideas in Aragon other than you have to take trade at some point because the benefits are way too good. Naval ideas to stack the galley. You put a fleet of galleys out there with an admiral and you're pretty much able to wipe out virtually anything. Plus you can even throw some heavy ships in there and you're pretty much unbeatable at sea. If you're going to deal with North Africa or any Protestants or anything, you definitely have to take religious ideas, because unlike Castile and Portugal, you really have no events or bonuses in that direction. Humanist ideas can also be very viable if you don't want to try and convert everything, but you will never be fully tolerant of Muslim provinces, nor of Protestant or Reformed or Anglican provinces, but it'll be a lot less unrest. If you're going to form the Roman Empire, I advise you do kill the Ottomans early on, take over the Middle East, and go for the Mediterranean ambition, control all the centers of trade, before you actually push on to get the remaining needed provinces to form the Roman Empire. I have done that. It's quite a fun way of doing it. I also know of several other people that, oddly enough, Aragon is probably the easiest country to do it with. Yeah, probably outside of maybe Austria or France, they're definitely one of the easier ones to do it as. Other than that, you start off with a really good ruler, a terrible heir, so fire your heir, hope maybe you even get a female and get union over Castile really early on. Avoid fighting Castile so you actually have morale or lots of allies. France is a particularly good one, as is Portugal. Try and focus a lot more on trade than you would as a normal nation, because a lot of your money naturally comes from trade. Your actual land itself is relatively poor. You have a couple good provinces, Valencia and other ones, but overall you've got a lot of hills. You're under 10 development in most of your provinces, other than actually Sicily down here is actually relatively developed. But other than that, your actual homeland province is relatively terrible, as are your islands. And don't trust Naples to show up to your war, because a lot of times their fleet will get sunk and then they'll get stuck. Now, I believe that is all I have to give you for a guide as Aragon. I haven't actually played through them recently while they have these new missions, but they're pretty self-explanatory. Tech-wise, obviously focus militarily early on, which you're going to do anyway because you've got a level 6 military ruler. And try not to die to Casteel. It happens way too often for me to not warn you about that. Iberian Union event, though, makes playing Aragon very viable. Just most people don't know that actually happens for them. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully it explains enough for you to actually play as them. If you've got any questions, especially about that weird Ottoman strategy, let me know in the comments. Or if you have any other comments about the video, or request other guides, videos, check out my other guide videos if you haven't. And please subscribe if you do enjoy them. And I hope to see you guys all in another video. Bye for now.